Hi, everyone. We got a special episode today. Today, we are going to talk about sugar and its impact on gut health, gut microbiome, and GI health. And to answer all of our questions, we have a special guest, Danielle Lavalle. She's our advisor to our company, GutSphere, and she is the perfect person to answer any questions that we have. Particularly, I have a ton of questions, and I'll tell you why I got interested uh, in this topic. And before I do that, I'd like to introduce Danielle. She is a licensed, registered dietitian, and she has a master's degree in nutrition science from Boston University, and she has a master's degree in psychology and is currently pursuing her doctorate in psychology. She is the owner of Lavalle Wellness, a private dieting practice that supports women and families in various nutrition related health conditions and optimizing their lifestyles to feel their best. He has worked as a consultant in public health departments, schools, and businesses to increase community access to nutrition education. And Danielle specializes in GI dietetics and is passionate about educating and empowering folks to improve their gut health and function for their higher quality of life. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And I was talking to you earlier as well. The reason why I got curious about sugar was, as we know, Halloween is coming, and kids and all of us indulge in sugar. And not only that, there's another this year. I don't know whether it has ever coincided or not. This year, there's another festival from South Asia called Diwali, and I'm from Nepal, and we call it Deepavali and Tihar. Even in that festival, it's all about eating sweets as well. So many parts of the world, we have festivals and indulging in sweets and sugar. So that triggered the curiosity. So let's begin right off the bat, right? Let's start with the children first. And how does eating sugar in high quantity in a short span of time impact the GI health of or gut health of children?
Yeah, so I think we can think about it in two ways, and I might be going ahead a little bit in some of where you want to go with this for like longer term impact, right? But when I think about sugar and I think about Halloween, and I have two children, the way that I manage Halloween and candy and all that stuff being sort of ubiquitous, sure, right? Like there can be an immediate impact on the gut. You could get a little diarrhea, you can get a tummy ache, right? But when it
Mhm.
comes to real like microbiome implications, what we're really talking about is precision nutrition, which is an up and coming field. We were hearing about it at DDW this year. That's that big gut health conference where we hear all of the new exciting research in gut health. And obviously, the microbiota is a very, very interesting topic and one that is
Mhm.
being increasingly researched. At this point, there really are no strong clinical dietary guidelines around what we can do with sugar specifically to
Mhm.
change gut outcomes. What we do know, and we know this pretty strongly, and we know this from epidemiological studies, is that a
Mhm.
diet really high in plants and plant diversity does tend to be beneficial to our
Mhm.
guts and probably increases the diversity of the gut microbiota, right? That exists for us. Um, One thing I do wanna make, a point I wanna make, because this is
Mhm.
the psychology in me, can't help but mention this, because I think it is really the bigger point. When I think about Halloween and I hear people talking about, the rules in their house, I hear, people at pickup for my kids, "Oh, we get one piece after," and, everyone has their own strategies of ways to manage it. I just want to highlight the relationship that we have with food and sort
Mhm.
of the what we're doing for kiddos when we introduce them to certain aspects of food and certain ways of eating and thinking about food, right? So I was thinking about, some of the therapeutic techniques I use and ways that I describe this, and I was thinking of sharing with you one of my favorites, which is imagine that you have a red and a blue crayon,
Mhm.
right? You're pick an age, you're 5, and you have a red and a blue crayon, and you want to color, and I say you can color with the blue crayon all you want. You can color
Mhm.
with it anywhere. You can color with it all the time.
Mhm.
This red crayon. You may color with this red crayon 1 minute a day, and it must be on this special paper.
Mhm.
And that is it, right? Which crayon is more special? If you
Red.
were going to assign a value to it,
Right.
inherently, like even our adult brains that know it's a blue crayon and a red crayon. What we're implying that it's a treat. We're implying that it's special. So what I actually see, and what I worry about is, well, I know that a really, diverse diet that's rich in plants is really helpful for the gut microbiome. I know
Mhm.
it's really helpful for long-term health and a lot of other things, and even just bowel
Mhm.
regularity, right?
Right. Mhm.
We're doing is I think we are hurting the relationship with some of these other food. If we say you have to eat your broccoli and
Mhm.
then you have a piece of Snickers from the container, poor broccoli. Like broccoli that it really gives the impression there's something wrong with broccoli, right? I was
Right.
texting my husband about dinner the other night. He made like an orzo pasta dish and it had lemon and it had broccoli and whatever. And he said, "Oh well, my younger son picked out the broccoli." And I
Mhm.
knew what he meant was he picked it out to eat it because it's one of
Mhm.
his favorite foods,
Right.
right? So but we never told him broccoli is a good food, right? We
Mhm.
never told him the pasta was bad and the broccoli was good. He just likes roasted broccoli with some lemon on it, right? Like, there was never that sort of mental shift. So I get more nervous the potential to hide and
Mhm.
binge on those types of really highly palatable foods later
Mhm.
on because we created this dynamic for our kids. This is a really special sometimes food, and this is an okay food that you should or a great food you should be having all the time.
Mhm.
And I wish we were rational beings. We
Mhm.
we could be like, but we're not, right? It doesn't telling us that something is bad for us really doesn't decrease our consumption of it. If it
Mhm.
did, this would not even be a conversation, right? So,
Right.
I think really keeping diversity in the diet and
Mhm.
making sure that we're not creating this moralistic thinking around food where
Yeah.
candy is bad, but, fruits and veggies are good. We see this in like Weight Watchers, right? Like there's 0 points for fruits and vegetables. 0 points. It's got antioxidants. It's got all of these beautiful things, and we're reducing it to be
Mhm.
0, right?
Right.
So I think it's a reductive way of thinking, and it kind of puts all of those beautiful plant foods that can taste delicious. It sort of undercuts them in a way.
Awesome. It reminds me of I was reading somewhere in Japan. Kids were asked what were their favorite food, and they said broccoli, rice, and other very healthy foods. And I think the question someone was he or she was from the US, and she was really surprised. And how come children are answering that those are their favorite foods? And Japanese responded, "We teach our children what's a good food for them." And then cultural difference in the US, and I could say that because I've only been living in the US for 8 years. Like most of the foods are come right out of the wrappers. What surprised me a lot was, let's say yogurt, right? It has probiotic, and what you see is a layer of sugar and of sweet foods added with extra artificial sweeteners into it. And that's what taught me, okay, maybe from the evolutionary point of view, sugar was not abundant, it was scarce. And in the foraging, hunter-gatherer foraging environment, something sweet means, oh, it's palatable and it's easy, it's safe to eat, to speak. And now, how does the brain function about getting satiated, getting rewarded for picking the right food has been hacked and is overindulging. So that's what I want to talk about today as well, right? How, so historically, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, when the sugar has been really abundant, how has it impacted the chronic conditions, right? And from your practice, the way you talk to it, and how people have, you know, uh, the short-term and long-term impact of it. I know because I know the plans, we don't want to be disruptive about this is good or bad. You know, anything can be good and anything can be bad. It depends on the extremities of it, how you want to indulge of it. But at the same time, there's things that we definitely know is bad. Right? So, one extra sugar is bad, and because we can experiment ourselves. But in this one, as our listeners are people who have GI issues, and
Mhm.
also it's very tempting to eat. When everybody's eating sweets, it's very tempting to eat one of them and still want to be able to do. Okay, you can have some, but this is how you want to manage. But at the same time, educate them and empower them to understand. Okay, these could be the issues that you could be having. So that's why picking on sugar sugar here.
Well, in let's define sugar,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Sugar, carbohydrate, and all
Right.
carbohydrates break down into sugar, right?
Right.
Your body really likes sugar because it's fuel, right? Like your
Right.
brain wants glucose, your cells want glucose. That is the biological currency for energy in our bodies,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
we really, when we think about, I think to your point, I think your point's on processing,
Yep.
right? And your point is on we have, and again, I would
Yep.
annoyingly, I'd make the point again that it's more about what we're not including in the foods, right? Not
Right.
about the presence of sugar, but a strawberry doesn't have different, and this is a misconception I hear all the time in counseling, that a strawberry has very different sugar than, something else, a table sugar or whatever else. It doesn't. It's
No.
broken
Yep.
down into those sort of base sugar molecules, right? But what I say to my patients is, what is it bringing to the party? Right. So when you think about sugar consumption, you think about energy consumption. And when you think
Hmm.
about that, you think about what else am I getting from it? And in nutrition, our job is we just want to pack in as
Hmm.
many nutrients, health
Right.
promoting nutrients as possible, right? So is there fiber? Are there phytonutrients? Are there antioxidants? Are there
Hmm.
those things that are going to create bulk for the stool, that are going
Hmm.
to help absorb those free radicals and help
Hmm.
be a little bit more anti-inflammatory so that we can
Hmm.
calm the inflammatory process in the bowel and the stomach, things like that, right?
Hmm.
And generally for our health, right? We have that
Right. Right.
link. Um, but yeah, so I think when we think about it, it's what is it bringing to the party? Did it
Hmm.
come all by itself?
Right.
Or did it bring some antioxidants? Did it bring some fiber? Did it bring some water? Right. And on top of that, how is it going to be digested? And I think that part is really, really key, right? Did
Hmm.
it come with fat? Did it come with protein? Did it come with fiber? All of
Hmm.
those things are going to delay the absorption and the digestion of
Right.
that, right? So is it in terms of like a blood sugar response? What can
Right.
we anticipate from that? And even candy, right? Like we're talking about Halloween candy. Candy's not candy, right? Like a Junior Mint is very different than a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, is very
Right.
different than, Laffy Taffy, whatever it is. So, I think, when we ground ourselves in the science of, okay, we are machines in taking glucose, to your point,
Right.
right?
Right.
For energy.
Hmm.
And now let's use our prefrontal cortex to make some good
Right.
decisions and use some of our science knowledge and say, what am I getting out of this? When I talk to my patients, I talk about filling a hunger cup and a satisfaction cup, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish both goals. And some foods may accomplish them better and in more arenas than other foods. So you're kind of optimizing what you're getting out of those foods. So I think sometimes where that thought comes from, and you tell me if this
Hmm.
is kind of what you're saying with the candy, you're not getting maybe as many domains, but you're getting enjoyment and you're getting
Right.
energy, right? One way we'll explain it, and specifically with kids, but I have to be honest with you, I've started using this with my adults as well, because I think it's a really beautiful, elegant way to describe it. You have short energy foods, and this is a shout out to my PD team who comes out with all of these things and has all of these
Hmm.
counts of energies. But you have short term energy, you have long term energy, and you have support food, right? So when I'm talking to my kiddos and they have, let's say they come home and they have Laffy Taffies and they want to have that for a snack. I'm not going to say to them, that's a lot of sugar. Do you have any, right? One, I've not dissuaded them from eating it by doing
Hmm.
that. I have now made it
Right.
really thing, right? As we mentioned earlier. But also, I've created this weird negative tension with that food. And instead, I might say something like, okay, what type of food is that? And they would say short-term energy. And I would say, okay,
Hmm.
well, we're going to soccer practice in 2 hours. What do you think? Like, oh, maybe I should, some peanut butter toast or some milk or, and they'll start to, okay, well, where's our support food? Right. What are the things that help our bodies function? Right.
Right.
So
Right.
I think it's a really nice way of thinking about it. And we use it in our pediatric practice. But I have to be honest, I use it a lot with my adults as well, because I think it really does, to your point, we don't want to be too moralistic in our thinking about food, but we
Right.
also use some of our higher level thinking and be making
Hmm.
choices that are
Hmm.
supporting our health, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
always the thing to navigate. And when we think about gut health in particular, we are thinking about inflammation. We are thinking about diversity of plants, wholer
Hmm.
foods,
Right.
carnivores in the diet, right?
Yeah. To follow up to that question, right? So for our listeners, could you unpack, right? Let's say for bucket three, this eating pure sugar in very
Mhm.
concentrated in high quantity. How is that an impact versus let's say you're eating uh strawberry, which is still sweet, but it also has other components such as fiber and other antioxidants and so on. And how does that impact? And third thing is, if you're combining that with some fats, right? Maybe fats such as like olive oil or healthy fats such as other omega-3s that we have. So can we go a little deeper and understand how this compare and contrast just eating in sugar in pure form independently versus eating with the fiber and eating with fats? How does that, varies our body's response?
Definitely. So I think first is the way that we might understand satiety, right?
Yeah.
And I tell people that it's a very subjective thing, and I think that's something to really, I've
Hmm.
had to learn over 10 years of clinical practice that if I give someone probably the same as someone managing pain, a medical doctor managing pain, and someone that when you ask them a 0 to 10 scale of pain, a
Yeah.
lot of things are going to influence what their response is, their lived experience. There's a
Right.
lot of things that are going to play into that. So when we talk about fullness, I just want to put out there that
Yeah.
it's a spectrum, and it is really subjective. Some people really need stomach stretch, right? We have receptors in our stomach that
Hmm.
when they slide across each other, our brain gets told, "Hey, we're full." So
Right.
literally just filling the stomach is a signal that we're
Hmm.
full, right? Blood sugar, blood pressure, those are other sort of alarm bells in our
Hmm.
system that tells, "Hey, you
Hmm.
should go eat something and need something." So the question is, how do those get triggered in different
Hmm.
ways? Well, fiber takes up space, right? So
Hmm.
fiber does a good job at literally filling the stomach, right? It also
Hmm.
provides some of those fermentable substrates for bacteria to feed on later on,
Hmm. Right.
right? Down in the
Hmm.
gut. And it helps make a nice stool volume so
Hmm.
that motility stays intact. And motility is really important in a lot of different ways. I know we've
Right.
talked about SIBO, right? Like compromised motility, huge underlying cause of SIBO, right? So we want
Right.
to have all of those things. So fiber can be really helpful in promoting all of that.
Hmm.
Fat also promotes satiety, so the way that you can feel after eating those foods, that feeling of fullness, but it does so by delaying gastric emptying. Right.
Hmm.
And I think it's helpful, especially for my GI folks, to know what these things are doing
Hmm.
so that they can apply it to themselves. For example, if I have someone with GERD, right, they have
Hmm.
reflux and they're eating a high fat meal right before bed, literally picturing, okay, that's going to hold in your stomach for a really long time because of that
Right.
high, right? Like they can
Hmm.
apply it. Fat also stimulates gastrocolic reflex and
Hmm.
creates motility in the
Hmm.
bowels. In a constipated patient, you wake up, you have some fat, right?
Right.
Like take advantage of that motility, right? So,
Right.
I think you can use them in different ways, but so fiber, fat, protein, antioxidants,
Right.
protein. It's just it's a trickier thing to break down in our body, so it just takes a
Hmm.
little bit longer. And antioxidants, phytonutrients, it's really hard to study nutrition
Right.
because it's so multifactorial. So there's a lot of data on a lot of different things, and a lot of
Hmm.
times the best messaging that we can give and the bigger overarching brushstrokes are from epidemiologic studies where
Hmm.
we look at, as you did in Japan, well, what are people eating at large and what are
Right.
the sort of overall implications for their health? And we know that a Mediterranean dietary pattern, higher in the unsaturated fatty acids,
Hmm.
lower in some of those saturated fats. And for folks not familiar with that, that would be the difference between animal versus plants, except vice
Hmm.
versa. That it animal being saturated and plants being the unsaturated, right?
Hmm.
So see how that's really beneficial. Is there a synergy between genetics and this and, the air pollution? Like it's just so multifactorial. Even your movement affect and
Right.
many things do, right? But I think there was research I want to say out of UCLA, moderate intensity exercise was best for most diverse gut bacteria, right?
Hmm.
So we really are living in an environment with our environment. There's a bidirectional relationship between us
Hmm.
and all different things. And so I think it's also important to remember food is one piece. And then the way
Right.
that that food is going to interact with you is very specific. So I also always encourage my patients, how are you feeling? Right? If they say, I feel terrible after fiber, like we'll try and dig down into that. But okay, is that some of those fermentable, saccharides? Like what's going on? But I
Hmm.
think your best case study too, and listen to your body and try to attune to what's really going on and what makes you feel good and doesn't. Kind of.
Oh my God, you're right. It's kind of preaching to the choir. I always say this. That's the reason why we are building Copilot.
Yep.
And compiled, what we say is, and this is not our original line. When I was writing a book called Living Constipation Free, I was reading a ton, and one of the books I read was Breath by James Nestor. And I do not exactly remember the quote with verbatim, but the line is this: uh, as a person, you must be pilot of your own health plan, right? And that's
Mhm.
really your taking, right? And all everything else is the navigator's co-pilot's data point that you got, right? But you got to be a pilot of your own health. And
Mhm.
I took that literally and became, scientist of my own body as well. And you're thinking, oh, what are the different variables I'm ingesting from the external, internal food, exercise, the sleep, and so on. And then just experiment everything and doing cause and relation analysis. And that's what like building a co-pilot, right? Every person deserves to be the pilot of their own health. But for that, you need data points, you need navigation, you need so on. We'll provide that tools. Okay, coming back to, coming back to the sugar detour. Uh, they, from what we know, sugar in itself is not bad, right? Because it's an essential nutrient for the body. And we can know that from our own experience. For example, if I have to go for a weightlifting or heavy exercise, and you can see from the marathon runners, like they have to eat for quick energy, sugar, right? Or bananas or smoothies and so on. We know that's correct. But
Yep.
at the same time, we won't eat that post workout, right? Post workout, because we don't need that short term energy, as you said. We need long term energy. Therefore, we eat on more protein so that we can overcome. So, but however, what I have a concern or curiosity about is the concentration and quantity of the sugar. As you said, as we are going into Halloween and Diwali, the
Mhm.
if you're eating a, let's say, processed sweets or sugar, it has too much concentration of sugar.
Mhm.
Whereas if devoid of other things like fiber or so on, and the calories that pack into that particular sugar is so high, right? So we can, and again, because we are indulging too much, too much sugar, too much calories so quickly, our brain function has a lag in responding to satiety, right? So, but we can really overeat, and that overeating and the uh, overstimulation, how does that impact with all of the diseases we're talking about in the short term and long term? And also,
Mhm.
I'm particularly talking about long term because, especially in the US, or not these days, like in many parts of the world, knowingly and unknowingly, we are consuming too much concentrated sugar in too much quantity that maybe our body can't do that because handle it. To give example, and I like giving the example, right? If you go to any grocery store in the US, except a few like if you go to Costco, let's say, the aisles and aisles of sugar coated food, right? And also, even if you look at some so-called healthy foods, and you look at the food levels and so on, added sugar is this much, and our body needs this much sugar of it, right? But that's where I'm coming in from. I'm trying to really understand, right? Okay, how is this overindulgent and highly concentrated in high quantity in the absence of other nutrients, which actually going to modulate and absorb and also reduce the, dopamine level in the brain. How is that all of these factors come in?
Totally. I will say just a little sports nutrition. You have about 30 to 60 minutes after exercise. You actually do want more carbohydrate because we store it as glycogen in our
Yeah.
muscles and our liver. That's what we use for the next time. I just had to just put it in there that it is starch after and it is carbohydrate after. For a little bit, you have a unique window up to 60 minutes. Anyways.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because we're taking a bunch of sort of Western behaviors in a Western environment, and then
Right.
just we got the Western
Correct.
environment, right, or behavior. And I think that, my experience with it, and this is a little bit of my ideology, so excuse me here, because I don't think there is an answer. I think there's a lot of
Right.
different opinions. I
Mhm.
think I could support my opinion
Right.
in well-founded science and in clinical experience, but and my good example for this is, and my answer is going to be a tune. Um, and that good healthy relationship with food right from the start. And if you're
Mhm.
not didn't have access to that, which many of us didn't, how do you repair or heal that relationship?
Mhm.
Right. And that's a larger topic. But yeah, I think the overall idea right?
Mhm.
Is how are we going to have these kiddos feel their own stopping point,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Because the assumption is if I, and I see this all the time and I see it with my adult patients too, and I don't think it's true. If I tell my kids
Mhm.
Halloween evening, go nuts,
Right.
have it all, then they will eat my dog until they get sick, right?
Right.
That is assumption that is based on a real lack of trust in your interoception, which we are
Mhm.
taught, to be fair, is
Mhm.
true. We are taught disconnect from yourself. This is how you should feel, not how you
Mhm.
do feel when you eat these things, right? And so you start just listening to the script, that external script,
Right.
instead of listening to what's going on. A really good I'll talk about the Halloween example with all the things later. But even my adults, perfect example. And you've heard this from people before. They come back from a vacation where all they ate was takeout food. Oh my god, I just wanted a salad so bad, right? Like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just craving a vegetable." Like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just craving a homemade meal," right? So, again, I think this presumption is that we will be always blindly led by our bodies into this overconsumption of sugar, and I think the reality is, have you overeaten, whatever it is, right? Like, you don't feel good. It's like it actually
Right.
feel good. And I think rather than saying, "Oh, you should only have," like, well, what is your body telling you,
Right.
right? And again, I think that relationship really pays dividends down the road in this regard as well, right? Because
Mhm.
if I do revealing a lot about myself here, but I do let my kids have as much as they want on Halloween because I don't make it a thing. I have to tell you, they don't ask me for it. They
Mhm.
eat until they're full. They stop at probably what I would have told them to stop around. And then they don't really think about it again. It's really not
Okay.
on their right. So I don't think that, to your point, one specific time is really not going to make a huge difference for better or for worse. And my proof for
Mhm.
that too, in our bias towards healthy foods in the
Mhm.
wellness and medical industry, right, is if you had someone who was eating Big Macs 10 times a day and then they had one salad, would you be like, oh my gosh, no, there's definitely no from your foods, right? Like, of course not, right? And the same is true, right? Unless there is a very acute condition that you're responding to, right? And there's a
Mhm.
sort of substrate or dietary trigger for that unique condition, in which case you should be working with a dietitian one on one, right?
Right.
Um, but that longer term relationship where you're not really asking about, they're not going to go when they're 10 to go hide, those sort of ultra sweet things in their
Yep.
room and then binge on them when no one's looking, or go to a friend's house and, oh, I have access to this, like, jackpot, right? Like, they're going to be listening a little bit better and saying, huh. And I know this doesn't sound real. It sounds like a snake oil thing. But when I work on folks with really attuning to how they're feeling, I've had people come to realizations that they ate ice cream every single night. I had one patient every Friday. They would pick a pint of Ben and Jerry's and they would sit, and that was like their thing. They each had their own, and that's what they did. We started talking about it, and the way she was describing it to me, she wasn't like, "Oh, it's the most delicious food I've ever." It felt very ritual. It felt very routine,
Mhm.
and it's
Mhm.
very social in nature. So we start working on, and I said, "Okay, well, have as much ice cream as you want. Try and sit at the table and taste it."
Right.
Wanted, right? And she found through this process, she actually didn't really care for ice cream as much as she thought she cared for ice cream. She actually did. That's not to say people don't like sugar. Like, of course, it tastes delicious. As babies, human milk, it's lactose, right? Like, we
Right.
like sugar. That's not to say that, but I think it is to say that the pressure on it, I think, creates a little bit of that over
Mhm.
response, right? Where if we
Mhm.
were allowed to have a neutral perspective on it, and then we listen to our body's response, we wouldn't feel really good. Countless examples of patients who I had
Mhm.
someone really believed gummy rings, peach gummy rings. That was it. That was life, right? That was the stimulation throughout the day. That's what she needed. Well, she had IBS. We started talking about, how does that make you feel when you
Mhm.
eat? And she's like,
Mhm.
I don't feel good, right?
Right.
But she had permission to eat them, and then she really listened to her body. She found her own titration of what made sense to her. And then I think when we talk up, we don't just say, yeah, eat your fruits and vegetables, but we say, hey, do you know put antioxidants? Because they're amazing, right? Like, do you
Right.
know what antioxidant does in your body? Like it's wild, right? And when
Right.
we talk
Right.
about some of those things and we pitch those as exciting, it is interesting the way people shift in their sort of acceptance of those foods
Mhm.
and they shift in their and again, perspective is so huge here, right?
Right.
If you're in another culture, we might not be as interested. Why? Familiarity, cueing, priming, right? So I think that's all really important in the conversation as well, right? But so
Right.
my long way answer and my short answer is I really actually trust our bodies. And I
Right.
really think there is, especially with my GI folks, they have this like spidey sense. They have this extra perception that they're able to have. And it stinks because it's uncomfortable, but it also they know. I've never had someone not be able to tell me to some
Mhm.
degree what dietary triggers are, right? I might be the
Right.
one, oh, that's fermentable. Oh, that high sugar food has a big osmotic load and is drawing water in, and that's giving you diarrhea. I might
Right.
be able to explain the why, but very few times am I telling someone how that food is making them feel, right? I'm in maybe helping interpret, I'm comparing the
Right.
science, um, but if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So here, I agree with you with somewhat, for example, in my own self, if you're very aware about your body, you listen to your body and you start thinking about on how that responds in that particular scenario. Yes. Like I know, for example, uh, whenever we go to an ice cream store, uh, but my wife and I order a kitty size,
Yeah.
n- not the medium large size, the kitty size, and two of us here because we know that after two or three spoons, it's enough for us, right? We know that. But at the same time, we also see people buy this gallon of it and this gulping down right in front of us. So that's where we want to talk about when our brain has been affected because of the regular consumption of that.
Mhm.
And there is a good habit and there is a bad habit, right? So that's where we want to educate people about, okay, in that scenario about, okay, you lost your track of awareness, you lost track of your, how your body responds to that because your brain has been hacked too much by the dopamine hit of eating that sweet enough food, right? In that context, right, how does that correlate and cause an effect with all the GI issues that we can list? Yeah.
And I would say I don't disagree with the brain hack, but I don't know if it's the
Yeah.
food that
Okay.
did the
Okay.
match.
Okay. Okay.
I I think the brain itself, there's a lot of different reasons that
Right.
someone be disconnected from
Hmm.
those cues. Mood is huge.
Right.
And we're irrational automatic beings, right? So if if we have coped throughout our lives and we found
Right.
some sense of comfort and some
Right.
sense of, if it's a hug on a day that we need a hug, and our brain knows exactly where to go get a hug, right? And we're not feeling those feelings. To me, that's if I'm meeting a patient that's telling me I'm
Hmm.
sitting down, I
Right.
sit with a container of ice cream, I start eating and I can't stop. Like first move is probably not going to be, let's look at your total sugar consumption. It's going
Correct.
to be
Yep.
why. So like next time you have that feeling, what need do you feel like you're completing with that? Right. Because you are correct in the sense that that spike has a response, right? And you do normalize in the same way we're talking about perception. For you now, you're used to sharing a kitty, right? Everything
Right.
is relative, right?
Yeah.
So sharing a kitty to even a small ice cream at a lot of the places, that's huge, right?
Right.
We can through our and I don't know where his research stands. I think there was a little controversy over some of the a priori stuff with his research, but really, really interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Wansink, but
Mm.
he was sort of the father of food psychology out of Cornell. And he did a lot of this with this idea of the way we subconsciously are influenced in our food choices,
Right.
right? Like all brown M&Ms versus rainbow, right? Or just having choice increases consumption, right?
Right.
And then you think about those mixed bags of the candies with all the different little ones and they're smaller and all of that. So, I think sometimes we also give a lot of credit to the food when there's a lot of other stuff at play. The food is sort of the instrument that we're playing
Right.
on, right? But it's not really the music. The sort of, is there an untreated mood disorder that this is functioning? This is keeping us like my peach
Mhm.
ring gal. She needed constant stimulation throughout the day. Her mood was very low. This was a way for her to get her through the day. The argument would be, if we want people to have healthier guts, if we want people to be able to do those things,
Mhm.
we can't just take away the coping and not meet the need, right? So I think
Got it.
defining what's there is really important too.
Oh, great. So yeah, I think that brings me to another curiosity now. So we know about the gut-brain axis, right? It's
Yeah.
bidirectional. So that's where, like, if someone has a mood disorder or so, disorder, and then the coping mechanism is, let's say, eating ice cream, right? So how does that impact the efficient cycleness of it? Because now you're eating more, then you're eating more sugar, and then mood becomes worsened or something like that. Can that happen?
Yeah, so I don't think we are at the point research-wise that we can prove
Okay.
that it does on a mechanistic level. I
Okay.
think we are at the point where everybody's really curious about it and thinks, "Yeah, probably." Because
Okay.
at DDW, they were
Good.
in the silverfish stage, right? We're not even in mice necessarily, of sort of looking at, and to your point, and I think this is the question, you can tell me if I got this wrong, but
Yep.
if the foods we eat are growing the bacterial populations in our gut, and if
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
bacterial populations in our gut are signaling our brain what to eat,
Right.
does get a vicious negative feedback loop
Right.
of same types of foods, right? And they are looking at that. I don't think there's no definitive
Hmm.
research on it necessarily. I will say something I find really interesting about it is a paper presented, adversity and perceived adversity
Hmm.
does also lower microbial diversity, right? So, all sorts of things, right? Again, sort of that, but weight was one of them. So if
Hmm.
you're nervous about gaining weight, you have body image disturbances, it's not favorable to your gut bacteria, which I find as another sort of negative feedback loop very interesting, right? So
Right.
you take on, and what we do know from earlier psychological research is we tend to take on food identities. And that's
Hmm.
a real concern I have with folks, right? That again, if your food identity is,
Hmm.
I am a healthy person that eats
Right.
food benefit my gut. So when you
Right.
go to the cream store, you
Hmm.
split a kidney because that fits that food identity, right?
Hmm.
If someone is being told time and again, or they learn really early, I'm someone that overeats. I have a
Hmm.
sweet tooth. I'm a sugar monster. I've literally had someone say that to me
Yep.
before.
Yep. Yep.
They're gonna, that self-fulfilling prophecy when they go into the ice cream store. Well, why would a sugar monster buy split a kitty? That's nonsense. A sugar
Correct.
monster, right? So there's that piece of it too, right? That really has a physiologic foundation to it.
Yep. Oh my God, hit on something that I have been talking about for a long time, about identity versus action. For
Yeah.
example, uh, just because you eat sweet things doesn't make you have a sweet identity. It's a sweet thing. That's it. And if you separate your action from your identity, it's so much easier to control the behavior of it, right? And people, for some reason, people have this tendency to assign identity and be consistent about it. And when you assign something to your identity, it's very difficult to change that particular identity. Whereas it's simply about action. I eat sugar this much today, ice cream this much today, then tomorrow I can eat a little less because it has nothing to do with my identity. It's just the action is variable thing. It's not a constant thing. You can simply change it. It's just such, I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's such a great way you just
Absolutely.
summarized it for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. And in your example before of, okay, maybe I go to a celebration and I have,
Mhm.
an extra serving of the thing and I feel
Right.
terrible after. To your point, and what I'll walk people through is, okay, I didn't love that choice.
Right.
That's data, right? I just got some
Right.
data about how I
Right.
feel in response to my environment. But it is really hard. And this again goes back to that moralistic thinking, right? Because we do place morality on food in our culture,
Right.
right?
Right.
Ironically enough, right? We really do. And it starts to feel very exclusive, I think, too, right? Like if you don't grow your own organic produce and you're not going to CrossFit 3 times a week and you don't wear, Lululemon leggings, you are not welcome in our wellness culture. You are not welcome in this place of health, right? And I think
Right.
that is so harmful. And it actually,
Yep.
I wanted to make sure I threw out there today. Are you familiar with orthorexia?
No.
So orthorexia, it's not in the DSM yet, but
Mhm.
it is a recognized eating disorder from the National Eating Disorder Association,
I
from
see.
Mass Eating Disorder
Mhm.
Association, and I have a link that I can send for
Yep.
people to. But it's this sort of obsession with healthy foods, right?
Right.
And I see a lot of my patients shifting into falling victim to that a bit more than some of the ways you would traditionally think of an eating disorder presenting, right? And I think that's
Right.
because the health and wellness space has really told you, oh my gosh, don't,
Right.
don't do any of these other behaviors. But if you want to be a good person, you better be, doing all these things. And a lot of that information is conflicting too,
Right.
right? Like really big anti-sugar diet is the carnivore diet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Yeah. And I've heard.
I can't think of a better way to inflame someone's gut, right? So it's sort of like but people are trying. They're really
Right.
just trying to find solutions. They really just want to feel their best. They want to be their best. And when they go to look at that, there's
Mhm.
this abundance of information that some of which is quite harmful. And so it can become a full-time job to try and figure it out.
Right.
In that process, people can develop a lot of really maladaptive
Mhm.
behaviors and they
Mhm.
really struggle and they really suffer.
I agree. I think that's the reason why really, when we are building Godsphere also, right? You be your own pilot. What will provide you to be aware of you, like data tools, gather real evidence about it, and give a contextual education about what you can do and what you cannot do. It's not about scaremongering. It's not about scaremongering. It's not about assigning identities. It's not about dismissing someone just because someone does something different from what you're doing. If
Mhm.
some, I have also read that the people who have severe depression, and if they go to a carnivore diet, that has worked for them, and that doesn't mean it works for somebody else. There are people who are vegan, and for vegan, if you're not getting B12 and you have supplement to get it, and that makes you feel well, go for it, right? But for most of the people, and just because someone is, if you're vegan, that's not just because someone else is not a vegan, dismiss them, ridicule them, just your carnivore diet, and just because someone else is not following carnivore, ridicule them, is it's about all personalized, your personal preferences, your cultural preferences, your lifestyle preferences. Someone
Mhm.
who, for like me, who has a desk job, sits 12 hours a day, the diet may be extremely different than someone who is an endurance sports athlete who runs like 20 miles per day, who runs 120 miles per week, 7 days a week. The diet may be completely different for that particular person. Whereas
Mhm.
somebody who is, farm boy throwing the huge pile of something all day long, the diet may be completely different, and the environment may be completely different. It's all about being aware and personalized and what works for them. And also, that's how and that's how the framework that we think about agriculture. Okay, how can we impart people to be more aware and be pilot of their own, and how can we provide them the data points, the tools to support their own decision making? We can't
Mhm.
decide for people. It's people who have to decide for themselves. We can't take control away from people. We have to give back the control. And what are the things that we can do that? So again, this is my, again, getting back to what Gus thing. I get really excited about this, so I can keep on talking, but I need to take a step back because I know we are getting off to an hour, but I also want to talk about two more things. One thing is for the benefic- for the beneficiary of the people who listen to us, what's of the GI issues. Let's
Mhm.
walk down. Okay, what's the impact of sugar for all the disease? Right, one disease from the top to the bottom, and then then finally talk about like how to mitigate some of the because knowingly or unknowingly we are living in the world in where we're skewed towards sugar-rich foods,
Mhm.
right? We're skewed towards that. And how do we mitigate that? And even after we indulge it, if you have the GI issues and still want to indulge in some sugar during this festival time, right? How do one can manage that? And also one more thing, which I want to talk about is like the, you know, there's another, ideology that really viewing is, oh, we can replace sugar with artificial sweeteners, right? And just because it doesn't have that sugar content, we can eat as much as we want, and that culture is brewing as well. Also, want to just quick highlight the risks and benefits of artificial, sweeteners as well, so that our listeners are aware, especially in the context of people who have GI issues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love what you said about gut sphere. It's why I am passionate
Yeah,
about it with you. I think
yeah,
empowering people, right?
right,
Because we really are looking to these alternate sources, and we are our own best case
right,
studies earlier too,
right,
right?
right, right,
So getting empowered with information, and then yeah, ultimately, as long as that information is accurate,
right.
and and I try to categorize information for people when I say, like I said earlier, like this is my ideology versus like this is what the science is versus this is
Right.
what clinical guidance is, right? And knowing where you fall on that, and then you
Mhm.
can sort of use that information and take that information to heart with understanding, where it's
Right.
coming from and how deeply rooted it is. But yeah, so I think one of the things we had talked about with sugar is SIBO. And I think
Yep.
that's a really important one because it happens with a lot of other GI conditions. And it's actually a lot
Mhm.
of other GI conditions can be the
Mhm. Yeah.
cause of SIBO. Um, I want to be clear that at this point, we have no reason to think that SIBO is caused by
Mhm.
diet. It is also
Okay.
not cured by diet, right? Your symptoms, are completely related to diet. So that's where it gets a bit confusing, right? In the top, I want to say 80 to 90. I sent a link where it'll have the
Yep.
direct quote for folks. But 80 to 90% of SIBO cases are attributed to motility disorders, pancreatic insufficiency, or chronic pancreatitis, really like medical disorders. So, one thing that I
Mhm.
find so disheartening is people trying to feel better with a SIBO diagnosis and trying to eliminate those fermentable carbohydrates, you
Mhm.
will feel better from eliminating those because the bacteria doesn't have food anymore. We
Mhm.
don't have data to say that we are starving those populations out and they're dying,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
that's a theory out
Yeah.
there, like
Yeah.
diets, things like that. We do see those populations return, right?
Mhm.
So we see maybe a clean breath test after a little bit on that diet, but then later we get recurrence. And even, let's just say for argument's sake, not that you're arguing with you, but let's say for devil's advocate, let's say we do cure it with
Right.
diet. That we don't, but let's just say that we do the underlying thing that caused it is probably still there. So we're going to get
Mhm.
that recurrent SIBO, and that's really common as well, right? So if we got that because of chronic pancreatitis, we need to be working on the pancreatitis. And if we don't, we'll just keep getting it again and again and get
Right.
into weird dietary
Mhm.
spiral of feeling
Mhm.
limited in the foods we can eat. And then sometimes things affect us, but sometimes they don't. And I get people coming in that are just so overwhelmed because they've been told low FODMAP, and then they've been told, that it doesn't matter and they get really confused. So, medical conditions are what we understand right now lead up to that. And that can be as simple as being on a PPI for GERD,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Lower stomach acid. Stomach acid is one of those things, those gastric juices help to kill and regulate the
Mhm.
population of gut in that small intestine. So, if you
Mhm.
have low stomach acid, that's a real possibility, right? And no amount of
Right.
sugar-free,
Thanks.
low FODMAP diet is really gonna change that. But with that overgrown population that loves those foods, you might not be as gassy, or you not
Mhm.
just because 'cause you're not giving it its substrate that it needs to
Mhm.
make
Okay.
all stuff that's making you feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable, right? So
Mhm.
we need to worry about nutrient
Mhm.
deficiencies, you have SIBO. So if you
Mhm.
suspect it, if you feel bloated, a real hallmark is 20 minutes after eating, a little bit after eating, you feel really bloated, you feel uncomfortable. And truly, SIBO can progress to be picking out starches
Mhm.
as their preferred substrate, right? So if increasingly you can't tolerate bread and then you can't tolerate sugar, like if you start to tolerate carbohydrate less and that never happened before, you might want to go work with a
Mhm.
GI and start to talk about a little bit
Okay.
about.
Mhm.
In the meantime, you can certainly try to avoid really gas producing or offending foods
Mhm.
there. For things like GERD, diarrhea, it can absolutely happen from taking a lot of sugar on it. Was same with fat.
Mhm.
Um, the answer there would be just know your own personal limit. I kind of tell people to, depending where they're at, if you are symptomatic at a 7, let's say, know what your plus ones are, know what your plus threes are. Maybe stress is a plus 5 for you.
Yep.
You got to watch your plus ones and maybe not do another plus 5 that day, right? Things like fiber can be really helpful
Mhm.
to slow down and to gel up. So that's kind of an easy win across the board. Psyllium, in
Mhm.
particular, has a lot of good data around it,
Mhm.
one way or the
Mhm.
other. Um, Other GI condition, IBD,
IBD, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, like those are more,
yeah,
more severe and extreme side. How does it impact?
it would be, it's different obviously during flare versus remission.
Just,
Let's say
yes.
we're in remission. Let's say we're in a good
Mhm.
spot. You're in a flare, you're working with your GI to sort of figure it out. And obviously that's more of a specific treatment of the flare than it is necessarily your desirable dietary pattern.
Mhm.
It's time and again Mediterranean diet, right? That's again that anti-inflammatory diet that is also going to be full of that diverse fiber that's going to
Right.
help really robust, diverse gut bacteria, we think.
Just-
From what we can tell from those bigger studies, right? We really
mhm.
don't have that precision nutrition. Again,
Right.
it was thrown around a lot in a lot of the research topics, that phrase in particular. So I think the goal is that we would be able to not only map all of our gut bacteria, which we can do actually pretty effectively, but we
Mhm.
don't have key. We don't know,
Mhm.
okay, what does this mean? And we also don't know
Right.
how, interacting with different individual characteristics about that we're expressing our genes and things like that, right?
Mhm.
So
Right.
um, that would be sort of the future. But an anti-inflammatory diet, and I love recommending that because there's very few people that's not going to benefit, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
please, there's it's really anti-cancer, like it's a very
Uh,
very supportive, very nutrient dense dietary pattern that we've seen a lot of really beneficial health outcomes with.
God. So yeah, uh, obviously, like eating anti-inflammatory food is that universally true, and we know that for sure, for certain, it's beneficial. But here today, like I'm getting back to the sugar and concept of the chocolates and overindulging in a short span of time, and this, so listen to your body, eat, with awareness, and then you'll stop when your body tells you to stop. Then eating in short term is not going to have that much of a negative impact. But obviously, that's a continued habit, understanding the root cause and starting to work with your clinician and then eliminating the root cause. Sometimes it could be beyond food, is what I understand. And also, uh, particularly dealing with the children, it's about, I feel like, giving back control to the children, getting A or B what you want, then again being very reasonable with them instead of telling yes or no. And yes or no, you they say that giving face sentence rules is going to have an opposite impact. Instead of giving back control to the children, being reasonable with them, reason with them makes more sense. And also, fourth thing that I can understand from this is obviously, uh, in a festival environment, we are surrounded by this and surrounded by this. And I can speak of myself, like we're thinking, okay, we are going to go to friends, we're going to have friends over, they're going to get the sweets for us, and I'm going to enjoy in a moderate. And so just so that I do not overindulge it, the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to eat more, more vegetables, more other fats and fruits first, and then then eat as a dessert so that I don't then overindulge and my body is already satiated enough. So when I just have a little bit of those, sweets, then okay, it just crosses my satiety limit and I stop it right there. So that, and I think those are things I would do, and pairing off with other things helps as well. So one thing which we have a few more minutes, I would really want to talk about is this artificial sweeteners. Like how does
Yeah.
it, what does the study tell, right? Because even with people who are diabetic and say they're perfectly fine, like I will just eat stevia in my tea and drink, right? And all. And I know all artificial sweeteners are not created equal. There are different variations which are more processed, which are more natural sources. How does that impact the, our gut health or the gut microbiome, or even the GI issues and symptoms that we have?
Yeah. So I think it comes back to, and I agree with you, we kind of lump them all together. And I
Yep.
wonder if we'll start to get some more specificity in our categories of them as they become a lot more part of our sort of mainstream.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but they're really categorized as non-nutritive sweeteners. And I
Yep.
think that's a really key thing to remember.
Mhm.
non-nutritive, they don't break down. They don't break down into energy. So when you think about like a big bulky molecule not
Mhm.
breaking down, right? Like,
Yep.
yeah, that can cause some distress. I just had someone who came to me for gut issues that I was fine. And then all of a sudden, I'm just getting this diarrhea and it seems so random and whatever else. Long story short, she was adding a specific, I won't call out the product, but she was adding something to her water that had something in it. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't break down really well. So sugar alcohols, um, sucralose, is fermentable, and you're correct, right? Sucralose, they just hung a little chlorine on a sugar
Right.
molecule. It's like stevia can come from the stevia plant, and there's different,
That's right.
right, monk fruit has been used in other cultures for a long, long time.
Right.
So we're getting allulose is brand new.
Mm.
So in our food supply. So I think we just have to kind of be aware of it and, realize that things that we've been doing for a really long time have a lot more statistical power to reveal issues. Things that we have not been doing for a really long time are not as robustly in the data, right?
Right.
So kind of measuring weighing that from a blood sugar standpoint, sure, you're not breaking them down, right? But
Right.
then they're traveling to the small intestine for action. They're traveling to the colon intact for action, right? So,
Yep.
um, just something to literal food
Right.
for and potentially gut bacteria.
Correct, correct. I think, and I can say, I think in the gut microbiome, in more of the understanding mechanics and understanding the more different factors and variables at the levels of the science in a deductive ways. I think we're still very, very early days. But however, from some holistic ways, like we have heard, that, okay, this is where a lot of these are associated with. And I think healthy gut and healthy gut microbiome is actually beneficial. I don't think that it's controversial to say that.
No, and I think, it's a lot of it, which is my favorite and least favorite thing about nutrition. But a lot of it's really KISS principle, keep it simple, and my house will say
Right.
silly. Right? Where really a lot of things, in grad school, I would learn about, biochemistry, metabolism. It like really always came back to eating your fruits and vegetables and whole grains and,
Yeah.
doing the things. So I think, it's not fancy, it's not confusing, it's not, we don't
Nah.
need to get too you don't need a bunch of supplements or products or, you can really look at, well, what are some basics? Am I having enough plants? Am I having different types of plants? Am I trying to
Right.
have some, whole food products in my diet? And to your point, that's not going to work with everybody's bowels, right? Like intact fibers might be a problem. So reach out and, talk to a
Right.
dietitian or a
Right.
medical professional at GI
Right.
if you're
Oh,
using this. Yeah.
100%. I think that's where another reason why we need to create this education is, I think we need to talk about subtraction, not addition. What I
Mhm.
mean by that is subtraction is, in today's day, what is abundant, right? Abundant is processed, high calorie, low nutrient. I think it's abundant all around us. I
Mhm.
think, and when we are aware, we need to subtract those diets from our diet, right? Subtract. And if we naturally subtract those things, we get back to what our grandparents were eating, right? They weren't eating processed foods. They were eating a variety of, fruits and vegetables that are seasonal, which are locally grown most of the time. I don't think we
Mhm.
need to talk about that because human beings naturally will, choose those things. And that has been happening since the evolution. But right now we need to talk about this because uh, we're surrounded by, just we no longer grow our own food. Not necessarily everybody has to grow their own food, but like if you go to a grocery store, it's like 80-90% of the food are processed food, right?
Mhm.
And that's where choice becomes hard. And that's where we need to subtract those food from us, I think. And especially with the GI issues, I'll give you a very specific example. When I tried constipation, one thing that I learned was pizza is poison for me. And
Mm.
And pizza, why pizza? Pizza has two things. It has other things, but predominantly there are two things for me. One is refined flour and cheese, right?
Yeah.
And I think which is difficult to digest and it doesn't travel well to the stomach in the acid tract and it takes more like it impacts the motility. So, and then For that reason, the combination of those two is poison for me. And that's what specific for me. I learned that. And therefore, I avoid pizza, but I love pizza as well. So how do I, how, so do I eat it every day? No. Now I eat it occasionally when I'm with friends. I say, I don't want to, I don't eat pizza. I don't want to say that, right? But I eat pizza slice or two slices of it, but I make sure I eat all fruits and vegetables along with that so that it's just processed through and I drink a lot of water with it. So I've learned to enjoy it without being a poison for me. So that's why being aware, let's say plus and minus, like if I eat 3 slices and whole pizza, I'm going to have problems that I know. But 1 or 2 slices, it's not going to be a problem for me that I know for my own body, right? So it's so understanding at that very level. And
And
so,
and you could say that that's additive
yeah,
too, right? Like
right,
you added these other things so that
yeah,
you balanced that
right,
so that you weren't getting, again, in that sort of orders of magnitude, if you were spun at a
right,
7, maybe that pizza, one slice is a +3, another one's a +3, great. And then here are some things that come in that you can add to that meal
right.
to increase the fiber and to increase those things that may actually help with that too. So I would actually say it's additive, and that we should things in that support
Yeah,
us.
something. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
with
Right.
balance, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
We subtract and add. We subtract things that hurt us. We add things that help us. So, right. I think it's a great, it's been a great show, a lot of fun about this. And you've sent me the different links and our listeners want us to dive deeper into those links. I'll share the links in the show notes and descriptions. And also, you have it, folks. The Halloween is coming along. The Diwali is coming along. Have a great time. Enjoy with the kids and family. And if you have to indulge in some sweets, do it in moderation. And obviously, pair it with other foods. And if you don't do it regularly, it most likely isn't going to have a long-term impact that we read about. But again, have it in moderation. That's all. Did I summarize it well?
Focus on your food relationship, and all foods are okay, and your body needs glucose.
Correct.
I
Right. Correct. All right, Daniel, thank you so much.